Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today I'm going to be discussing which campaign I think is the best. We're going to go through different categories, characters, villains, story structure, etc., and giving them points depending on which one I think wins for that round. And by the end, we're going to have which campaign I think is the best based on the point system that I've come up with. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Oh, one thing. Spoilers ahead, obviously, and I'm going to try not to put my personal bias in here. I'm going to try to be objective about how I think these things work and which one works the best, blah, blah, blah. But of course, personal bias is going to get in the way. It isn't totally objective, it's obviously subjective. Everyone likes certain things a different way. Somebody might look at something and go, oh, I think that's terrible. Someone thinks, oh, that same thing that you think is terrible is great. So, yeah, we'll get there when we get there. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is the arc structure for each campaign. So campaign 1 is structured via arcs, and they very cleanly fit into these arcs. They go from one arc to the next, and they're based on what happens with the villain. The villains come in, and then bang, they have to do things based on that. It's very reactionary on the part of the players. They don't go out and seek these things. Typically, the Briarwoods show up. Typically, the Chroma Conclave shows up, and then in the end, Vecna shows up. So it's very much based off how the villain appears, and they have to react to it, making these characters reactionary characters, and the plot is sort of a reactionary plot of trying to defend their home, Tal'Dorei, Iman, all that sort of stuff. I like this. I think it's good, but I prefer more of a actionary sort of way of things where the characters happen to the plot. Now, of course, the Vox Machina are related to a handful of the villains that show up. Obviously, Briarwoods are a good example, and when the Chroma Conclave showed up, they had already fought a member of the Chroma Conclave, and then the entire fourth arc of the first campaign is them sort of going out and finishing their sort of character stuff before Vecna shows up. So they do become actionary characters once something happens, but the initial start for each arc is almost a reactionary thing. And personally, I'm more of a fan of actionary characters where they go out and do things. So moving on to campaign 2 story structure, very similar to the first one. Each arc is very clean and segmented, but unlike the first one where the characters are reactionary based off how the villains sort of act to Iman and the rest of Tal'Dorei, the characters happen to the plot way more often. They are more actionary characters. They go out to certain locations, they do things and affect the world based off what their goals are. They go out, do things, and make sure the plot moves forward that way. Instead of reacting to the Chroma Conclave, they go out and deal with Xhorhas. That sort of thing is how it's sort of different. They go out, they do things, and then other people react and change around them. It's very interesting and very, in my opinion, a much better way to sort of display that the world is based around these characters right now. Because it's a game of D&D, and it should be very character-based. It should be focused around the player characters who are sitting at the table. They're the important ones right now. And your villains are sure they're important, but the players are more important. And I find this to be a much better story structure to have the players sort of go out and the DM reacts to them, which is why I prefer this over campaign 1. And then moving on to campaign 3, which is a totally different sort of story structure. It is one long continuous narrative. And the villains don't just, replace each villain each arc. Ira was technically one of the first villains we had, which then moved on to Odahan, which they're connected, which moved on to Ludinus, which they're connected, which moves on to Predathos, which they're all connected. They're all one big sort of group that are working against the players, and the players are, once again, reactionary, but each character are sort of connected to this main threat, which makes it more of a personal reactionary thing instead of just the villains show up, bam, we have to deal with it. This is much more connecting to their backstories, and frankly a lot more interesting than just the villain shows up. This one is the players are going after something, and then the villain shows and sort of shows their cards and who they are, and they're the bad guys. What's nice about this is it's something that's, long, and you don't have to continuously think about new things that are popping up each arc. It's all the same thing. Everything is aiming toward the same goal, the same end game. The issue with it is you can't really just hop in and out. For the other two campaigns, you would be able to hop into one arc and sort of watch from there. If you didn't, see the beginning of the Briarwood arc, you could just go to the Chroma Conclave arc and watch from there. So vice versa with the next one and the next one. Same with campaign 2. You could hop in one arc, miss an arc, but you're still good because these arcs are segmented. This one is one long piece of narrative, and if you miss something, you're kind of behind and you have to catch up with it. This is the first campaign, in my opinion, where if you don't, start from the beginning, you're kind of in trouble. The other campaigns are you can miss an arc here and there, and then start watching from the next arc, in my opinion. That's a big negative that this one has. A positive is it's one long story. So if you want to have a long, continuous story that doesn't swap around its villains terribly often, this is the one for you. So now I have to give the point out for this round of sort of story structures, and I'm going to give it to Campaign 2. I much prefer the actionary approach of the characters, the story being based around what their goals are, and their motivations, and their backstories. I find it a lot more interesting. So as far as story structure, this one's really good. Campaign 2 is getting the point, but Campaign 3 is really close for me. I love the long, continuous story idea, but the issue it has is you can't miss anything. If you miss something, you're in trouble, and you got to go back and watch it, and if you keep continuously fall behind, you're going to not want to catch up. Whereas the other campaigns, you can just hop into it, and the other ones or Campaign 2 specifically being character-based, makes it a little easier for you to hop in and not have to worry about the major villain of the story because it's about the characters. Next, we're moving on to the villains, and I feel like a lot of people already know what I'm going to say about the villains. It's Campaign 1. Campaign 1 had 3 of the strongest villains in general, with Vecna, the Chroma Conclave, and the Briarwoods. They are amazing. The Briarwoods are the golden standard for villains for a lot of what people compare to when they talk about Critical Role villains. Of course, Lucian / Mollymauk is amazing, but as far as Campaign 2 villains, Lucian's the only one that truly stands that high up, and it's unfortunate because I love a lot of the villains. Lorenzo, in my opinion, is really good as well, but he wasn't around for very long, and once you start to trickle down, Vokodo is the next one, but again, wasn't around for too long, didn't have a totally massive build-up, just there for the one arc, and bam, that was it. Like I said, Campaign 2 is more built around its players, not necessarily the villains, whereas Campaign 1 was totally built around the villains. The characters are reactionary characters to what the villains did every single arc. It was very much a villain-centric story. That being said, Campaign 3 also has fantastic villains. Ira was a good start and sort of turned into an enemy of my enemy as my friend, so they're still technically an enemy, but we don't know. And then you have Odahan, who has devastated the characters at least twice now. First and foremost, Odahan has killed Will and attacked Keyleth in Orum's backstory, and then killed other characters that Orum was trying to meet up with, and injured another, and then killed Laudna. Just killed her. She just killed her, and then went on to kill Lord Esteros. Odahan's a menace, and is absolutely devastating a lot of the key characters so far in this campaign. She then went on to crucify Keyleth at the dig site. Just slaughtered her. It was brutal. So Odahan is a very vicious character, and lewdness stands over her, and it's even that much more interesting. And Liliana stands sort of next to Odahan in all this as well. These characters are interesting and very good, but we're slowly learning more and more about lewdness and how interesting he is. Liliana, we're still on the fence on if she's a bad guy or not. So can't necessarily talk about her. And then obviously there's the looming threat of Predathos. Do they stack up to the Briarwoods and Vecna? Maybe. Which is why I kind of am sort of torn on this. But the gold standard being the Briarwoods, and if I really thought about lewdness next to the Briarwoods or Odahan next to the Briarwoods, they're just below them. Just below them. So Campaign 1 gets the point here. Very close. Very, very, very close. But Campaign 1 is going to get the point for now. If I go back over this video later after the campaign's done and lewdness and Predathos have done something wicked, they'll probably take over. But the gold standard is the Briarwoods because of what they meant to one of the characters, what they did to the players, and just sort of how interesting their setup was and what they did to an entire city. Just very fascinating. And they would later return and become the underlings for another villain, which makes them even that much more interesting to me. Because when they were over here, being the main villains of an arc, they were slowly building over to this character, and it's just so good. The Briarwoods are amazing. The gold standard for villains, and they haven't been passed yet. Don't believe they've been passed yet. Very close. Ludinus, and Odahan. So close, but not quite. Next, we are going to be talking about the guests of each campaign. Now, of course, the guests of each campaign do not break or make a campaign, but they certainly add to it, don't they? So, right off the bat, I'm going to eliminate Campaign 2. They were very top-heavy in Campaign 2 with a lot of the guests, but due to a certain event that happened in 2020, that sort of died off and we didn't get any more guests. That being said, there were some good guests: Jocasta, Twiggy, and a handful of others. Keg, very impactful Keg. And, there are others that were very impactful, but they don't have the impact that certain other characters do. Obviously, Archon comes to mind, Cash. These characters who are in Campaign 1 show up a lot. There are a ton of recurring guests in Campaign 1 who are very good. However, I would be lying if I said that it was even close, because Campaign 3 annihilates the guest segment. First and foremost, Dorian and Robbie are amazing. 14 episodes of them? It was great. He is amazing. If there was ever a guest who could become a full-time player, it's Robbie. And Dorian would slot in perfectly with the Bell's Hells, and no one would ever bat an eye twice about it. People thought he joined for sure when he was there. So then we're going to move on to the next guest, Yu, who of course some people weren't big on, but I really liked the character. I sort of liked the relationship that she's tried to build up and then backstabbed everyone with. And then of course, we have Frida and Diana, who are amazing guests, who relate to some of the characters who showed up. Frida being another Eormiton, just like FCG, and they sort of made their relationship and their bond. And Diana with Chetney being a character from Chetney's backstory is great. And now we have 3 new guests who I am enjoying just as much as the other 2 who were introduced for Team A, with Bodor, Prism, and Denise. Loving them so far. Some people don't seem to like Bodor, but I really do like him. I just don't think they like how he interacts with people. I like all of these guests. I don't think they've missed a single time on guests. Campaign 1 had a couple of misses for me. Campaign 2 had great guests, but they didn't stick around long enough for a terribly big impact, with the exception of 2. So personally, Campaign 3 is killing it with the guests. And I think it's because Campaign 2 was so top heavy and then the other later half of the campaign didn't have any, that they chose to do this. Campaign 3 has had amazing guests who have stuck around for no less than 6 episodes. They have been around. Once they show up, they're there for a while. And it's very interesting and very fun. And I very much enjoy every guest that have shown up so far in Campaign 3. So now I'm going to talk about the characters of each campaign, Mighty Nein, Vox Machina, and the Bell's Hells. And this is where my personal bias is going to shine through a lot. I feel like for a lot of people, their favorite characters are going to be the one they watched first. And, from there, it sort of trickles down to which one you prefer. So I watched Campaign 2 first, so I think a lot of people are already going to be like, oh, he's going to be picking the Mighty Nein. I am picking the Mighty Nein here, for a handful of reasons, though. First and foremost, looking at Vox Machina, I find most of their characters to fall into a lot of character tropes. They are their first characters, so it's a little bit forgiven, but they're still character tropes. When I first started playing D&D, way before I started watching Critical Role, my character was just Vax. I made a rogue, very edgy, very stealthy, same class, literally. I made Vax. My brother made Grog. So before we even watched Critical Role, these characters were already being used. So for me, as far as the Campaign 1 characters, a lot of them fall into the same sort of archetypes as a lot of other first-time characters. Keyleth is the naive druid. Scanlan is the horny bard. Vax is the assassin, rogue, edgy type. Grog's the big, dumb barbarian, hit things hard. The only one, even Pike is the only one, in my opinion, who's not falling into the first cleric archetype of I'm holier than thou, I follow my religion through and through, because she doesn't do that. She's the only one, in my opinion, who sort of steps outside of the box of typical first character. Moving on to Campaign 2, I think a lot of these characters are super interesting with what they are and what their goals are. Ford trying to find a father figure to become a man and sort of step into his own. Jester trying to go on an epic adventure and realizing that she can't just be her mother, she has to be her own person, and it trickles down from there with Beauregard. She is trying to prove herself that she's more than just some low-level class person, and her father was wrong and she's deserving of a high station. and it trickles down from there. Campaign three's characters are all really good as well. However, I feel a lot of them are just going with the flow. Most of them are connected in some way, shape, or form, but characters like Orym, Fern, and Imogen have sort of taken the forefront of the story and have sort of pushed the other ones to the back. Ashton has had very little so far, and it sucks because they're 60 episodes deep, and I would love to see some more Ashton stuff. And with them being where they are currently in the campaign, I was hoping they would do that, but as of right now, they haven't. We did get some more FCG and some more Chetney stuff very recently, so hopefully we get to see more from them. But as of right now, I feel like Campaign 2 sort of delves into the characters the most. Like I said in the first part with the section of the story and how the arcs worked, it was about the characters. So of course, they're going to be a lot more stronger in their character than the other two campaigns. So I have to give it to them because their character is just much more apparent to the story. So there are other categories that I could talk about today, but unfortunately some of them would require that Campaign 3 were to end, and it's not going to end anytime soon, so I can't talk about the ending of each campaign because, I don't want to talk about relationships because the relationships aren't done in Campaign 3, and none of them are truly solidified quite yet. And I don't want to talk about the intro music to each campaign because that's just very subjective on what music you like. So I'm going to not use those quite yet, and eventually when we re-talk about this conversation later on, I will eventually go over those and add to this video. Until then, I think I'm good with the categories, and I believe that means it's 2-1-1 in favor of Campaign 2. So, as of right now, for me, Campaign 2 is the best campaign. I could have told you that at the beginning, of course, but I definitely had to stop and think about the guests and the villains because it's, true that the villains in the Briarwood arc are the best villains so far in the campaign of all Critical Role, and the guests in Campaign 3 have been perfect. So, had to give those 2 points there because those are the points they deserve so desperately. So as of right now, Campaign 2 is the best when I'm talking about it like this. So that's the video. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know down below if you think Campaign 2 is your favorite or is the best based on how would you guys break this down? Give me the arc setup, the characters, the villains, and the guests. Tell me how you would break this all down and what points would go where. So I'll see you guys on Friday for the recap of episode 61 of Critical Role Campaign 3. Until then, peace.